Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for being here this morning. I think the most important step of, talking about mental health and getting better with mental health is just being there and discussing it and talking about it. And that's what we're doing this morning, just showing up and being here to talk about it with each other. That's the very first step. And then secondly, thank you to our veterans, the service to our country that you guys have provided. It's the sacrifices that you've made. I mean, I work for the USO right now, so I interact with active duty members and veterans quite a bit. So I understand the sacrifice and all the things that you guys have done, and I truly appreciate it. The wonderful introduction from Kevin, as he said, my name is Carson Molle, and my story today is one of redemption, hope, that kind of thing, all those good things. When I was 14, I decided to try and take my own life. And obviously, there's a lot of things that go up into that. There's my childhood growing up from when I was born to when I was 14, and then the past 6 years up until now. And I'll start from the beginning. Growing up, there are a few things that were very important to me. Sports, specifically football. How many football fans we got here? I'm guessing a lot of us. Yep, go Packers. School and family. I've always been very close to my family, had a very strong relationship with my parents. I have 3 siblings. I'm super close with them. And then I enjoy going to school. I'm a college student right now. I don't enjoy it as much as I used to, unfortunately. But back when I was younger, I really liked going to school. I liked learning. I liked seeing my friends, interacting with teachers, and that kind of thing. And growing up, all these things that I held of such high value to me, I didn't realize the kind of pressure and the impact that they were having on my mental health. Nowadays, I've been diagnosed with, anxiety, depression, PTSD, that kind of thing. But when I look back at, before I attempted to take my own life, I was experiencing all of these things and I just didn't know it. My earliest memory ever of having some sort of mental illness, I think I was about 10 years old in 5th grade. And I woke up one morning before my first ever tackle football game, right? And remember, football was really important to me. I think growing up, I used to wear a Wisconsin Badgers football helmet all the time, and my parents would be like, Carson, time to come eat dinner. You gotta take your helmet off, and I would just refuse to take my football helmet off. That's how much I love football. I woke up on this Saturday morning. It was probably about 5, 6 a.m. And my game didn't start until 10 o'clock that morning. And I just woke up in cold sweats, my heart beating on my chest, just anxious beyond belief. And at the time, like I said, looking back at it, it's pretty easy to understand that this was, a sign of anxiety and mental illness. But 10-year-old me laying in that bed at the time, I didn't know that. And I thought it was just something that I could brush aside, ignore it, not talk about it, and just keep going. So I did. And that's what I continued to do through those 4 years from 10 to 14. Like I said, there are things that were important to me: school, sports, family. And I look back at it now and I can pinpoint these moments, right, where I'd have an algebra test coming up, and before the test, that same feeling would happen. I would get that heart beating on my chest. I'd be sweating, my hands would be shaking. And then if I did poorly on the test, or if I did poorly in a game or something like that, afterwards I just felt like a disappointment. I felt like a failure. And obviously, me being human, especially a teenage human, I made plenty of mistakes during that time, right? The months leading up to my suicide attempt, there are a few things that happened. I broke my arm playing hockey. I failed a math test. I got into arguments with my parents like any teenager does. And through all of those things and through the pressure and the anxiety that I felt surrounding those things, when I inevitably messed up, because like I said, we're all human, I felt like I was a disappointment to everybody, right? So all of these things that were so important to me, I felt like I had failed at each and every one of them. I felt like I wasn't there for my teammates in hockey, my coaches. I felt like I wasn't living up to what I could be in school if I was failing tests. And, my parents expressed disappointment about that kind of thing. And looking back at it now, I mean, obviously, no blame on them at all. I love my parents to death, and they have done nothing wrong. But I felt like I had let them down and that I had failed them. And that evening, the evening I attempted, March 4th, 2017, coming up on almost 7 years now, which is crazy to think about. I got into an argument with my parents, typical teenager stuff. But after not only the few months leading up to that moment in time, but like I said, the years that I had dealt with mental illness, I remember going to my room that night after getting in an argument with my parents, like I said, normal stuff. And I remember laying on my bed just crying, and I thought to myself, after that argument, I thought, what if my parents, what if they were just better off if I wasn't here? And that thought kind of spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. It led to, what if my teammates were better off if I wasn't here? What if my friends were better off if I wasn't here? Then they don't have to worry about me disappointing them. They don't have to worry about me failing them and laying them down. And, as I stated earlier, that led me to trying to take my own life that night. And obviously, this led to a whole nother branch in life that I could have never expected at the time. Obviously, I didn't expect to survive. And this is where my faith kind of came into play and really saved my life, I feel like. I remember the first thing I remember waking up after my attempt. I attempted with a firearm, and I think there's a statistic out there, less than 1% of people who attempt to take their own life with a firearm actually survive. So when I woke up and I was alive, I was laying on the floor there, I remember thinking to myself, and it wasn't a clear, really conscious thought because, I was pretty severely injured and a bit out of it at the time, but I had this instinct and this notion that, like, you just survived something that people don't live through, right? Like, you got a second chance at this life that you're not supposed to have. And, I tell everybody, anybody who will listen, like today, I feel like my life was saved. I felt like I had been given a second chance for a reason. And that it was truly divine intervention because, like I said, people just don't do that kind of thing and then live to tell the tale. And like I said, I didn't know any of that at the time. I didn't know that 1% of people survived that. I didn't have that thought, but like I said, I had this instinct that I had just been given a second chance at something, and I needed to fight to hold on to that. I remember being airlifted to the hospital from my house, and this comes into, that instinct and that will and that fight to survive because I felt like my life had been saved, and it had. And I remember, the person piloting the helicopter to the hospital, they picked up the radio, and I was laying in the back, medical attention, and they radioed ahead to the hospital. They're like, we got this kid here, he just attempted to take his life. We're going to bring him to the hospital here, but, he's not going to be alive when we make it there. And like I said, at the time, I didn't have that clear thought, but I had the instinct. I'm like, okay, yes, I am going to be alive when I make it there, and I'm going to be alive to live the rest of my life because I had been given a second chance at it. And that came into play pretty much daily through the past 6 years of my life, right? Obviously, going forward, it hasn't all been sunshine and rainbows. There are some very difficult times. A part of the healing process and kicking off those 6 years was that first day that I woke up in the hospital. Here I was, 14-year-old kid laying in a hospital bed, scared out of his mind, tubes hooked up to me everywhere. I can't move, can't talk. I couldn't breathe on my own. And I remember the first thing I wanted to say, I wanted to tell my parents that I was sorry. Because, if you remember, everything that led up to my suicide attempt, everything that led up to that moment was me feeling like I had let them down and I had failed them. And here I was, having made the biggest mistake that almost anyone could make, right? I just made my parents drive 2 hours down to Milwaukee, not knowing if their kid was going to be alive when they got there. And I realized that, and I felt like I had let them down more than ever, and I felt like I had made the biggest mistake I ever had. One thing that always sticks with me and will stick with me for the rest of my life is my parents, they looked me in the eye after I told them I'm sorry, and they said, "We forgive you." And at that moment, I realized, like I said, everything that led me to that moment was feeling like I had made mistakes that were unforgivable. But I had just made an absolutely massive mistake, something I could never take back, and something that was going to change not only my life, but the life of my family members forever. And they still forgave me, and they still loved me. And that kind of compounded out from out there. My teammates would come visit me in the hospital. My friends would come visit me in the hospital. And I kind of realized through those moments that no matter what I did, the people who were going to love and care about me, they were still going to love and care about me after those mistakes that I had made. Even if I felt like I them or I'd let them down, they were still going to be there for me, and I never realized I had in that moment. I touched a little bit on how the last 6 years have gone, and how my faith has kind of come into play through those 6 years. And like I said, it hasn't always been easy. I remember the first few years were probably the darkest times of my life. Over the past 6 years, I've had over 20 reconstructive surgeries to repair the damage that was done to my face. You do the math, that's a little over 3 per year. And as you can imagine, going through high school and college and that kind of thing while having to miss a bunch of time going through surgeries and being in the hospital for months at a time, not exactly easy. And there were nights I remember in those first few years where I'd be laying in bed at home, just miserable, right? I felt like I was never going to get my life back. I felt like I had obviously made a decision that had changed my life forever, and it was never going to be the same. It was never going to be good again. I felt like the rest of my life was just going to be me in pain, and that my suicide attempt was the only thing that would define me. There were nights I would lay in bed and I would question my faith. I would think, what would have happened if I didn't survive that night? And even through those darkest times, moments where I was at my lowest, I always remembered that, my life had been saved that night, and that I should feel lucky to be able to survive something like that. And that was something, like I said, that I think about every single day. It's carried me not only through those dark moments in those first few years, but throughout life as well, even these past few years when I have been doing better and I have grown. I'd like to share a little bit about how I started sharing my story. Like I said, those first few years, pretty brutal. I didn't really like to talk about what I had gone through. I didn't like to talk about what I was going through. And it felt like that my suicide attempt was kind of just like this dark cloud hanging over my head, right? Something I could not get rid of, something that was just raining on me constantly. And at one point, I just felt like, I can't live like this anymore. Like, I'm just miserable every day. This has defined me. This has defined my life, and not in a good way. And I remember laying in bed one night when I was 17, and I thought to myself, okay, you can't go back, you can't build a time machine, you can't change what you did. But what if you could take everything you've been through? What if you could take your experience and everything that you've learned over these past 4 years, and what if you could share that with other people? Perhaps you can reach out to another 14-year-old who's struggling with mental illness and tell them, what you're going through. Tell them they're not alone, and maybe they decide that they're not going to try and take their life. So that night, I made a quick 1-minute TikTok video. Social media, I felt like, was the best way. This was during COVID, so I couldn't really get out and talk to people very much. I posted it, went to bed, didn't really think much of it. And I woke up the next morning, it had, thousands of likes, thousands of comments. And I was scrolling through the comments that morning, and, I saw what I wanted to see. I saw teenagers reaching out and saying, I've been going through the same thing. Like, I've been struggling with anxiety and mental illness all these years, and I thought there weren't other people like me. I thought I was the only one. And then I saw one comment of someone who said, listen, I've been thinking about taking my life for a while, but all these people, now that I see I'm not alone and there are other people going through it, I'm going to get help, and I'm not going to take my life at this time. And when I saw all those comments, and specifically that comment, I realized I could do something with this. That dark cloud I had hanging over my head, it got a little bit lighter that day. And it's continued to get lighter every single day since then. It's gradually grown into something now where, I do a lot of public speaking, like today. And it's something I prefer. I like to see everybody face to face. I like to talk to people, answer questions, that kind of thing. And it's something I really enjoy doing. And I certainly don't plan on stopping. But that's something I like to share. It's a message of hope, right? That dark cloud that I was talking about earlier, that cloud that was constantly raining on me for years, it's not so dark anymore, right? In fact, a lot of people ask me, Carson, do you regret what you did? Would you go back and change what you did? And for a long time, the answer would be absolutely yes. Like, if there was a time machine, bring me back right now. I would change it immediately. But at the point I am in my life today, my honest answer would be no. The way I can help people and the way I can share my message and the impact that I can have, it's not something I would ever want to change. And it's opened up an entirely new branch of life for me that I'm extremely grateful for, and I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So wrapping up, if I could leave you guys with a few words here. I know it sounds crazy. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm a walking, living example of that. I'm someone who's been in the lowest of places, the darkest of places, right? And I've made it out to the other side to the point now where I've been able to turn it into something positive, not only for me, but for everyone around me. And I think that's really impactful, and that's just something I'd like to share with you guys. When you're going through a tough time, you're really struggling. I've been there, and it is possible to come out on the other side. Thank you.